Dobrý večer ještě jednou, protože vidím, že počet lidí, který tady je, tak se možná skoro zdvojnásobil, z čeho mám velkou radost. Nerůstový hnutí vlastně, jeho kořeny jsou hlavně v západních nebo západo-jižních zemích, jako je Francie, Španělsko, Itálie, kterých jakoby historická, politická, ekonomická situace je vlastně značně jiná od té naší. A proto je důležitý vlastně ptát se, OK, jakým způsobem budeme nerůst komunikovat tady v střední, východní Evropě. Rád bych teď představil Josefa Patočku, který je jeden z spoluzakladatelů organizace Reset, která spolupořádá tuto konferenci. Jožka se konkrétně věnuje hodně nerůstu, o kterém třeba i píše, ale také energetické spravedlivé transformaci nebo spravedlivé transformaci obecně.
Hi everyone. I would like to open this panel by just reminding ourselves of the framing or the questions that we want to ask ourselves in terms of the big question for this panel, which is how do we degrow in the semi-periphery, and what does socio-ecological transformation mean for countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And to get us into the context, like 30 years after the fall of the so-called Eastern Bloc, of the state socialist bloc, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, former state socialist countries, are like, you could say, on the border of two worlds or between two worlds. From a global point of view, we belong to relatively rich states, but within the European Union we are clearly more of a periphery, which is dependent economically and is characterized, for example, by low wages and high outflow of value abroad. And related to this are phenomena such as political polarization, which is really strong in recent years. There is the rise of the nationalist right, which also positions itself as a defender of our nations against the globalists. And on the other hand, you have these middle-class, liberal mobilizations, which are basically framed as in defense of the status quo, but we want to transform the status quo. So the questions are, like in this specific situation, how do we create a politics which is consistently both social and ecological, and start creating an economy of meeting needs in ecological limits? And I'm really happy that we can perhaps begin searching for answers to these questions with my guests this evening, who I am about to introduce. On my right here is Nadia Johannisová, who is an ecological economist, and you could say one of the pioneers of degrowth and ecological economy in the Czech Republic, and is a person, I would say, who introduced many of us in this room to the concepts that we are about to explore together. Then there is also Geza Csorba from Hungary, who is an IT developer, and he's also an cooperative activist in an organization which is called the Solidarity Economy Center in Hungary, which is trying to build economic alternatives from the bottom up in Hungary. There is also Jan Zygmuntowski from Poland, who is an economist, but he's also a practitioner. He's also involved in a revival of the cooperative movement in Poland. You will have the opportunity to hear both Geza and Jan again in the panel on economic alternatives and in a workshop on the revival of cooperatives and of solidarity economies in maybe we hope for a revival in Central and Eastern Europe. And there is Ondřej Slačálek, a political scientist from Czech Republic, who has also recently, together with a political scientist and sociologist from Hungary, Agnes Gať, edited this book on the transition in Central and Eastern Europe 30 years after the fall of the former regime. So I posed some initial questions for the debate to our guests, which are what are the challenges arising for us from the context that we face in this region. How do we try to evade or overcome this polarization between the liberal pole and the nationalist pole, which both are pulling the society seemingly in opposite directions, but actually this conflict is like foreclosing the opportunities for the kind of transformation that we would want. How do we deal with this situation? And the third, which is, I'm thinking about that a lot, but it's probably, I don't find it an easy question, and I have been reminded that it's not an easy question also by some of our panelists, that our region actually has this specific experience of a non-capitalist or attempted post-capitalist economy, which works as it's a big barrier to imagination. Like if you say that we should move to a post-capitalist economy, a lot of people in our region will be like, oh, we tried that and it was a nightmare, so what do you want? But on the other hand, compared, for example, to Western Europe, we have this interesting experience of an actual transition in the 90s also, in people's living memory, and of systemic change. And my question is, like, what can we learn from that also, perhaps? And maybe what is valuable in our experience to the degrowth movement in other parts of the world? So for a change, like we're always catching up with the West. It's this common discipline in our part of the world. Like, why can't we have what they have in, I don't know, Switzerland? So for a change, like, what could the world learn from us? So those are the questions, and there will be the opening contributions, and I will ask Nadia first to start.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Well, actually, I'm not sure. Are we supposed to answer the questions now, or is there a general introduction?
If we don't, we will then come back to them in the discussion, I presume.
Okay. Because I wanted to first sort of mention that we have to think of the challenges we are up against, and this holds true not only for Eastern and Central Europe, but for everybody. And this is really the two mainstream dogmas of mainstream economics, and one of them is growth, and we have been speaking about that here quite for a long time. And the fact that these dogmas, which were installed for many centuries, for several centuries, and especially since the 1970s, have been institutionalized. So there are institutions which are pushing the society towards growth, and this includes the way money is created and so on. And this will be spoken about and has been spoken about. But the other dogma, which isn't so much discussed even in degrowth, is the dogmas of compulsory free trade. And I think it's also important to have the intellectual confidence to sort of try to debunk this belief in free trade. That means that we now have almost no regulation of the flow of goods and of capital, so that really price is the only criterion, everybody has to be cutting the costs. But the costs that the companies cut are, in fact, usually externalized onto somebody else, onto some community, onto the ecosystem. And as Richard Douthwaite has famously said, one person's cost is another person's wage packet. So I think it's important to sort of mention that in addition to the dogma of free trade, which we also have to somehow institutionally dismantle the structures which are forcing us to it, we also should be institutionally dismantling the structures which are forcing us to free trade, which has now become compulsory. This process leads to the states being hostage to markets and not really being very easily able to bring about the socially and ecologically beneficent policies which we want, because companies will move elsewhere if they're not satisfied, or they will stop being competitive, and so on. So, for example, there's the attempt at the carbon tariff. The EU would like to have a carbon tariff because if you want to tax the use of fossil fuels in Europe, what will stop other countries from exporting products to Europe which are not subject to a carbon tax and which are thus cheaper. So there's a discussion within the Green New Deal about the carbon tariff, but this may be against WTO regulations. WTO, World Trade Organization, has some kind of regulations for free trade. So I think that we need, both in our part of Europe and all of Europe, the intellectual courage to discuss both these dogmas, not only growth, but also free trade, and also the institutions which they have sort of spawned and which is making us part of some kind of mechanism. So that was something I wanted to mention in general. Then I think it's important to, at the same time, to introduce some positive policies, because some things that people can understand. One of them is economic localization. I'm not sure how much we will be speaking about it at this conference, but essentially the support of local production for local consumption, producing value directly for the local community, using local resources to meet community needs. So I think this is an important policy which should be heard from people speaking about degrowth. And the other one I wanted to mention is economic democracy, which means economic democracy as a policy. So not only political democracy, but we need economic democracy. Tadeusz has also mentioned it, I think. And this would mean like limiting economic power through regulation, through control of multinationals, but also limiting the power of international markets, so regulating, taxing the flows of capital, and limiting the concentration of capital in ever fewer hands. I think it was Gilbert Keith Chesterton, the English novelist, who also wrote detective stories, who said that socialism and capitalism don't differ. They both take away the property of the small person. So socialism right away took it away, but under capitalism there's this latent pressure to concentrate power, to concentrate capitals, to concentrate land, to concentrate money in ever fewer hands. So I think this is what we need to sort of discuss more and fight against. We also need to support the right of people to take an active part in the economy, not only as producers, but also as, not only as consumers, but also as employees, but also as producers, as somebody taking actively part in the economy. So when we speak about redistributing income to people, projects such as sort of for everybody to have the some kind of living wage, or even basic income. but all this isn't enough if we don't give people a chance to actively participate in the economy. And the pressure is for unemployment, the pressure is for workers to be shed all the time. The pressure is for people are essentially redundant in an economy which is more and more using technology, robots, and so on. So I think that economic democracy needs to look at distributing not only income but also distributing capitals. So, but what do I mean by capitals? This could be access to land, so land allotments to grow your own food. This could be communal production space. This could be access to know-how, how to start your own organization, your own company, and also support of the small scale. And I think that's very important, and it hasn't been emphasized enough in our circles that we need to support small-scale enterprises, small-scale organizations, and to reject the equal playing field hypothesis. Because a national team on one hand and a small local football club on the other hand, what will happen if they are on the same playing field, right? The local club will lose. But we want to support the small local organizations, the small local producers, the small scale. And so I think we really need to think about economic democracy, which, as I said, entails limiting economic power, but also distributing capitals and having a plural economy. That means acknowledging non-monetized forms of production, support craft-based forms of production, which are rooted in place. So that was what I wanted to sort of say generally, and then maybe we can get to the other questions later.
Thank you. We could say that Nadia has proposed a pretty concrete program of working towards an economy which would be much more localized and also democratic, and which would give us much more power over the society that we live in, basically through forms of economic democracy. And I would pose the same question to Jan, because
I also run a co-op.
Yeah, because you have the Co-op Tech Hub in Poland, and you're trying to build and multiply cooperatives again in Poland. So basically, you could say that you're trying to put in practice what Nadia has said. So what are the challenges and the experiences that are relevant to our questions from your practice in Poland?
So you want me to answer all three questions, or just the first one, or scramble it?
You can
scramble. Yeah, okay. Well, so I think this. By the way, the questions here, and this is exactly the kind of stuff we've been working through the last 2 years. So, like the questions that are posed, what I'm hearing here, this is extremely timely, and I think like this conference on degrowth is super timely because degrowth has started. We are already in. The degrowth now is happening on an absolutely chaotic, not planned, kind of like market, who gets first to the resources way. But it's gonna get drastic. I mean, with growing inflation, raising interest rates, bottlenecks in supply chains, with this kind of disruptions, we are experiencing degrowth. But this is the kind of degrowth that will result in the smallest guys feeling this pain the most. So I think at this point, the questions we ask are not like, how do we get to degrowth, but like, how do we get through degrowth, like safely, and to manage somehow to go to the next horizon, right? Where like it stabilizes and we can somehow live within these planetary boundaries. I think one of the greatest challenges of our region is that we have very low trust, kind of, and low, and not many opportunities for people to participate in economic decision-making. And this is the kind of economic democracy that Nadia has mentioned. I just don't think we can have democracy if it's only political, But in the economic sphere, we have pure dictatorship of capital. That means that at some point, the capital will decide that it doesn't need political democracy anymore because it's just a nuisance. I mean, at some point, we will want to curb or introduce planned economy of, how do we shift out of some businesses, like we try to do with fossil fuels, and then they will try to kill political democracy as well. So for me, getting to cooperativism was basically understanding, okay, we need to redistribute ownership, right? So it's the kind of like antithesis of what the World Economic Forum is saying. They're saying, the kind of like the Great Reset, you've heard it, the populists talk about it a lot. This like, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Like our response should be, no, we will own everything and we will be happy because we will take part in decision making in that. So basically what we started to do is restart co-ops by explaining that co-ops and commons, right, like commonly governed resources, that they are that they can function in this new economy. So energy co-ops, this is quite obvious, but like digital co-ops, and then later like city co-ops, where basically the city square is a common space, and then it also takes resources which are unused by the city council, for example, like empty vacant buildings, and we say, okay, let us rebuild them and refurbish them, but they become part of the commons now. And you would not imagine how many of those city councils do it, because we repackaged it in neoliberal wording, and they just think it's progressive and they think it's the future. I mean, it is, but obviously it is going towards some kind of other type of economy. I'm not sure if I would say it's different than socialism. I think this is what true socialism was about. I mean, like socializing the means of production, but also in every terms of means of production, knowledge as well. What you said about the World Trade Organization, I mean, the politics of intellectual property is genocide, because the vaccines could have been produced by India, by South Africa. They have the largest manufacturing of drugs, and they couldn't because they had no access to basically patents, right? So it was basically genocide. COVID was a genocide done by, I'm not sure if it's free trade. If you tell someone you cannot produce it, I would say this is corporate restricted trade. And yeah, that was just the first question. So I don't want to go maybe deeper, but I would just say that to finish this, that I think what we are facing now with this kind of like raising interest rates, limits on energy use, basically people being told that they have to limit themselves, or that prices on some goods will be higher. This is a new type of austerity, right? This is the 2008 austerity, but it's just now repackaged in this green way. So it's basically like a green austerity. What we need is find a way to have more of like an eco-social populism, where we say, right, we limit ourselves, but from each according to his ability. And that means that some have to limit themselves more, those who consume more, those who emit more, and these are corporates and the richest. And if we can reframe it that way, then we will have a really strong space for the re-emergence of our movement.
Thank you, Jan. I would say Jan has, you could say that in a pretty nice way. He has centered us on the central conflict. You could say there is this thesis that there always is a central conflict in a society, and this central conflict between the largest corporations. You have been talking about the World Economic Forum, so this is the thesis promoted by the late sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein, that you have this conflict in the world between the spirit of Davos and the spirit of Porto Alegre, which was the place of the World Social Forums. But in Central and Eastern Europe, it doesn't seem often that this is the central conflict. That's what I meant when I was mentioning how this there's a lot of talk about the culture wars between the liberals and the nationalists, and how it's taking us and taking focus off of the central conflict and towards, you could say, compensatory or even sometimes manufactured conflicts around gender, for example, or LGBT rights, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't matter, but they are used to take the focus from what is happening like behind this media appearance in the economic structure where the real power is often. And I know that Ondřej is thinking a lot about this topic in the past years. So now I would ask him to have a go on the options of transforming this conflict or getting out of it, because I know, for example, that you also read the conservative populist media a lot. We've been talking about this last year, how Ondřej is looking into the Palantir for us. Yeah, that's my question.
You know from the Lord of the Rings that men who often look into Palantirs become more and more crazy, and then they do not end well. So maybe this is one of the few last occasions when we can meet, and I am not as crazy as I will be. But thank you for this introduction, and thank you for another question, because I wanted to answer your 3 previous questions, and then you pose me another, but I will try to do it somehow. But maybe I will start with, because I think we have listened great ideas about degrowth on semi-periphery. I will speak less about degrowth and more about semi-periphery, and maybe this will lead me to answer your question, because I think I would start with, there are basically 3 approaches which are typical for semi-peripheries and which I think are typical for our region. We can illustrate them on other examples, but we can also illustrate them on reaction to climate crisis, and I think they will be relevant for position of our region and semi-periphery toward degrowth. The first one can be called by term of Giovanni Arrighi developmentalist illusion, and I will really schematically pose it as follows. Like, this is the idea that we should do the same things which were done by successful countries of the core, and we will have same results. Yeah, because those are good receipts which are universally applicable, and we should repeat them. I think this was exactly idea of Václav Klaus or Leszek Balcerowicz or people like that. Like, okay, there are some universal truths which should be applied, and we will have same results. What, of course, didn't have same results. Of course, there are some determinants which prevent from the same results. And there was some work of reflection. I think even many promoters of these policies are now more clever. And there are 2 other answers of semi-periphery on anything. One, maybe I would call semi-peripherical pessimism, and it can be illustrated by approach of our region to refugee crisis 2015, and I think also by reaction on climate crisis when in comparison with Germany. We can remember Angela Merkel and her slogan, "Wir schaffen das." Yeah, we are as good, as strong, as powerful that we will manage that. Refugee crisis will be only challenge. We will integrate those refugees because we are wealthy enough, we have enough of resources, we have well-developed culture, and so on. And I think there was a lot of racism and xenophobia in reactions of our region on refugee crisis, but racism and xenophobia is not enough to explain the difference. I think there is another explanation that even people who were not racist, who were not xenophobic or only not as much racist and xenophobic, had that feeling, okay, we cannot honestly say, wir schaffen das. We were unable to manage even much smaller social problems. So how can we evade that wir schaffen das? No. That answer was, we cannot afford it. Maybe this is luxury for some rich Germans who can afford integrate 1 million of refugees, and then they are powerful enough to I really do not want to be very polite to Germany. I think that idea, we will say, wir schaffen das, and then we will make some very dirty deal with Erdogan about making other refugees de facto prisoners of Turkey, is not as humanist position as it looks like, but definitely it's better position than ours. So, and I think there was like repetition of this difference in reaction on climate crisis. The German position was position of like wealthy society which thinks we can afford it. And Czech and I think also Polish even more than Czech answer on it was, okay, maybe you can afford it, but we cannot afford it. It's the like climate-friendly policies are luxury of rich societies. We cannot afford it. Maybe you also cannot afford it, and you will buy electric energy by us when your idealist, idealist visions will fall down. I will try to be briefer. And there is third approach. It's semi-peripherical megalomania. And this is that idea, okay, wir schaffen das, but in better way than those rich societies. We can mobilize ourselves and be better. I think, in fact, Germany in 19th century and beginning of 20th century was semi-peripheral country, typical for this semi-peripheral megalomania. And I think another example of this semi-peripheral megalomania is, and maybe it's controversial, but I think it's approach of our countries during contemporary refugee crisis, when we see the opposite. And to be clear, I completely agree with that it's necessary to help to Ukraine and to Ukrainians, and as much as is possible. But what I really have mixed feeling of is that idea of premiantism in this help. Like, we are the best in helping Ukrainians. There are, I think, and many people of you have Twitter and have seen that tables like, we are the best country in accepting Ukrainians refugees per capita. And maybe you forgot about that there is some country which is called Moldova, which accepted much more Ukrainian refugees per capita. But yeah, that feeling, okay, we are the best in helping Ukrainians. And it's, I think, really strange, like what kind of competition it is. Can we really help to Ukraine and Ukrainians by this kind of competition? Or maybe some unified European action would be much more helpful. But this competition makes perfect sense in the context of semi-peripheral megalomania. Okay, this is the moment when we can show to others that we understand it better and then we do better, that we help better and more and we are better. So I think, maybe it's not a good example, but I think it works, that there are some moments of semi-peripheral pessimism, and there are some moments of semi-peripheral megalomania, and this development between two refugee crises can be illustrative. I think in case of climate crisis and of approaches to degrowth, we have mostly in semi-peripheral pessimism, but there are also moments of semi-peripheral megalomania. And I wanted to ask also for two other questions and also for the first, but I was not sure. So only 2 sentences. I am really deeply suspicious to idea that we can teach anybody anything, and teaching is really position of power, and only superpowers were able to teach the world, and even in their case, it had really bad results. But
This sounds like pure semi-peripheral pessimism.
yeah, it is. And what I think is needed is dialogue. And I really love authors like Polish philosopher Jan Sova or Hungarian sociologist Agnes Gady, who underlines that to understand our situation, we don't need to compare with the West too much, but we need dialogue with South, and actually with two Souths, with Global South and with European South. And I think in this dialogue, we can teach very much about ourselves, and maybe we can reconstruct more what we do not know about us. Okay, one last question. If you ask me how to overcome this division and those artificial culture wars, I don't think that they are artificial. I think they really express some important cleavage which is basically globalization versus locality, and feeling of deep insecurity which is produced by this cleavage and which is translated into many other conflicts. And I think what we can do is think about this and think strategically about our struggles. And I will finish by example quoted from two Polish sociologists, Agnieszka Graf and Elżbieta Korolczuk, who published now the book on anti-gender populist rhetoric, and they reflected how they reacted on anti-gender offensive in Poland. Because they were really shocked, because they were gender studies scholars, and at some point they were under attack that, okay, gender is some satanic world conspiracy ideology, and they really didn't know what to do. They remember for that moment, like, okay, should we discuss with them? Maybe we should explain them what gender studies is, that it's normal scientific discipline, that we are people like you and we do some normal science. And they realized that it wouldn't work. Surprise, surprise. And their political answer was like, let's do some completely different struggle. And they focused on situation of single mothers and their families, and this was struggle which made possible for them to build some unexpected alliances. Because even for many conservatives or religious people, this situation of single mothers was moral scandal. So it was possible to build there some alliance and to do some practical feminist politics. And I think there is some moment of inspiration how to answer it. And sorry for speaking probably too long.
I'm really happy your contribution has ended in some semi-peripheral optimism, if you will. But so my next question is, like, with this I turn to Geza, and maybe from this really abstract or large-scale discussion of the political dynamics in the region, it's good to go back a bit into. I know that you have a really like practice-based approach in Hungary, which is exactly trying to create unexpected alliances and work through the obstacles and barriers in a very practical way. So what would you say works from your experience in your experience in Hungary?
Yeah, so I think the most threatening crisis is the climate crisis right now. And I want to tear down this to smaller problems we need to deal with. And one is the housing market, one is the care work, and the other one is the food production. And we need to find a solution, find alternatives to the current system, because if we don't change these things, then we can't really change the way the capitalist world works. So I want to ask a question. Can you raise your hand if you have experienced the rental house market? Oh, it's not a rhetorical question.
The rental house market.
Yes. And how many of you think that it's affordable? It's also not a rhetorical question, so be brave and say it's cool and cheap. Okay, okay, yeah. I would expect it so. Okay, so if we really want to fight against the climate change, and we expect everyone else to do the same, we need to satisfy everyone's basic needs. And housing is a basic need. So after the COVID-19, the housing market prices skyrocketed, and like it's 2 times as pricey as it was before, and we need to find another way to live with others. And the Solidarity Economy Center's pilot project, one of its pilot projects, is to create a co-housing model where people live in small communas, like 3 to 10 people live in the same house, and they don't own it, but they create a legal entity and try to work as a cooperative or some other alternative organization. And by doing this, the threat of getting sick or getting fired from the workplace is mitigated, as you don't, because the risk is shared across all the members in this, let's call commune. The other project is the care work. So I think COVID-19 also showed that when you need to focus on other things than the usual, problems might come. And for example, children under like 12 years old need to be they need to be taken to schools, and if you can't do this, then you need to stay with them at home, and it makes our problems even worse. So we need to find some kind of solution to prevent this and to ease on the burden of the care workers, mostly women, and find something to that could be an alternative to kindergartens or such. And food production. So currently the problem is with food production that if a big producer gets out of the circulation of capital, like Ukraine, then famine follows. And so basically a lot of other countries are able to produce food on their scale. But yeah, currently it's more efficient to produce the food for export and then for the market, basically. And if there's a problem like a war, we suddenly cut off from our food supply. Yeah, and I also part of the IT cooperative in Hungary, and we have a lot of volunteers who can code in their free time. It's a very privileged position because IT workers are well paid, even in Hungary, and they can afford to volunteer at NGOs and other organizations. So we need to find a solution to make their free time valuable for every of us. And our biggest challenge right now is to find a project to connect with international movements and do something useful other than creating new softwares or new products to be consumed. Yeah, and to support small businesses like cooperatives, as you may know that the utility prices went up a bit. In Hungary, from July to August, the gas prices became 7 times more. The electricity became 4 times more. So small businesses need to find something to survive. And yes, it's a really actual project for us to find something to connect them, make an ecosystem, and yeah, help them to survive. Thanks.
I'm thinking how to proceed next. We will also get to questions from you, which it will also be possible to pose in Czech. But before that, maybe a short answer, short question, short answer from each of you, or those who want, on a question that will perhaps develop on what we were talking about right now. Again, and maybe it will work to pose it in a very concrete way, which is, you have been talking, Jan, about this idea of this eco-social populism, which basically is complicated words for that we would want our program to be really popular, right? And we would limit our consumption as a society so that we would meet the ecological limits and redistribute the rest in a way that would allow everyone to meet their needs, perhaps also through redistributing ownership through cooperatives and municipal localized forms of economic democracy that Nadia has been talking about. But and this sounds really great, like having the power to implement that program. It sounds even like we have some horizon in this milieu that assembles at this conference. It is often said today that it's hard because we don't know what to walk towards from the system that we have. It seems that we know what we want, but I think a much better answer for why we are not always successful is that often we don't know how to begin or how to start. And meanwhile, like for example in Czech Republic, the situation is such that there has been like a first major mass demonstration against the rising prices on the Václavské náměstí in Prague. And it has been led by this weird mixture of COVID denialists, far-right, fascist-leaning figures and libertarians, and also Stalinists. So basically everyone came to the party. And the closest thing that we have to some eco-social populism is the trade unions who are calling a demonstration for a minimum wage raise and price controls. So pretty not much of a redistribution of ownership. You could say it's a very modest minimum program, but it's not a very eco-social populism. There is a lot of anti-Green Deal rhetoric. So this example, I'm putting this example of the situation right now in Czech Republic to just like remind ourselves of how it seems to be difficult in practice to put this program through. Also because we don't have those kind of alliances and common understandings that would be needed for this. Beginning from Andrei's questions, but also the talk about the on-the-ground practice in Poland and Hungary, about the unexpected alliances and trying to find new, unexpected, innovative ways of how to create those connections that would allow us to start putting this program into practice. What are you thinking are the ways forward, the ways to begin in our context? And I will start with Nadia as before.
So the question is how to begin. Well, it's very hard for me to answer this. I think we should listen to what these people are saying. I mean, I lived in the 90s in a small village, and the people were saying, well, we really liked communism because we had a stable job and we had this place to eat and we put our children into kindergarten, and they had a whole different worldview. Their social rights were important, not going abroad or buying books. So I found out that these people just don't seem to have a voice, and this is why they team up with all these populists. I think I think we should debunk the economic globalization paradigm, which is what some of these populists are also doing. I read a newsletter of the SPD, which is a Czech sort of right-wing nationalist populist party, and they were saying, let's get out of the EU because we don't have any jobs here. We are sort of trading with other countries and cheap products are coming. They were saying exactly what we are saying in a way. That was their analysis. But then their solution was, let's get out of the EU and then we can have our own agreements with other countries to exchange goods in a more advantageous way, which is really impossible. So somehow to listen more to these people. I listened to an economist speaking on the radio, and he was saying, well, economic globalization is great, but some people haven't made it in it, and then they are, against it. So it's like us, we who have made it, but those guys down there, they haven't really made it. So we have to make allowances for them. And it's a very patronizing approach. So there seems to be a group of people who are not very vocal, who don't get into the media, but who very strongly feel that their social rights are being threatened. So somehow to listen and not be patronizing. So that would be one idea how to start forward. And I also wanted to answer the question of what we can teach the other countries, because I think there are things which we are better at, and one of them is quite obvious. And all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe are much better at growing their own food, for example. So we grow our own food. About 40% in the Czech Republic grow our own food. This is also an economy. So if we can think of the economy as something which is not only making money, but producing things for ourselves or for our surroundings, for our relatives, for our community, then we're much better at this than the British, for example, who maybe it's 5%, who grow their own food. So this is, we haven't gone so far ahead, but sometimes it's better not to go so far ahead if the ahead is in the wrong direction. So we should be glad that we have kept many of these survival skills. And so I think it's very important to appreciate even the old people who have these skills and not say, oh, it's the pensioners, and it belongs to communism. Because sometimes even cooperatives are seen as something which belongs to the old days and communism. So to reframe, we should, I think, reframe gardening as something belonging to the future, cooperatives, something belonging to the future. A lot of things we had were good in a way. So that was another comment.
Thank you. I think that's very useful and inspirative, and I will turn to Jan now, and also I have to ask you to be a bit concise in your answers, because I also want to give space to the public to ask questions. Thanks.
Right, it's gonna be super difficult because I have so many notes now. But two things. What I can tell you from the kind of like Polish experience is that we have the Conservatives running the government for 7 years now, and they have been great in, they basically run on a platform of anti-neoliberalism, of localizing economy, of the developmental state. Our PM has wrote the introduction to Mazzucato's entrepreneurial state. Like seriously, that part was, and I worked for the government for a brief period of time because I thought maybe this, but they fell into the category of developmentalist illusion, definitely. And now they're in full megalomania. But basically what happened is that still they have crossed this threshold of giving really high, compared to even all other European countries, really high cash benefits for kids. And that reframed the entire economic debate of like, should we give anything to the people, especially to the ones who lost in the globalization? Like obviously, if you have a kid, it means you lost in globalization, and then you just stay in the village, receive benefits for the kid, and blah, blah, blah. And it's still framed this way. But once we reframe it and we say, and this is what is happening now, and we basically say, no, benefits without you building systems, without you building housing, care work, without creating infrastructures for people, this is basically, and without involving them in decision making, this is a patronizing reinstallment of feudal relations. This is the feudal lord who gives you something because you are on his land. No, the land is yours. And this is the kind of reframing that is going on now. The kind of unexpected alliances that we're building is I am mostly regarded as left-wing economist and advising the left-wing party. But just recently I said I'm gonna build the economic program for the new peasant party, which looks like an uprising basically. I mean, just It goes from town to town. The guy just walks on the city square and he keeps on speaking. And most of the people who come, they look like anti-vaxxers. They look like the usual right-wingers. But once you start talking to them, you realize they are about resilience. They are about localizing. They are about protecting themselves from these external forces. And you can build these alliances with them. And I think this is what switched in the last 2 weeks, because really there's this like huge media fallout after this. And we switched from being ridiculed to being a threat now. I mean, like the entire today in the train, 6 hours, I was just deflecting attacks of economists from banks and funds on Twitter who are actively taking every word I say and like trying to turn it somehow to kind of ridicule me, but like to say this is bullshit, like the person is crazy, like do not trust him. So that means we're effective. This is the second stage. But the final point I want to have, which is maybe not on political strategy, but like on actually the economic strategy we have, is we have this like, I think it's arising here, this dialectic opposition of like, whether we want things centralized, and we have this story in Eastern, this kind of like socialist welfare state, right? Powerful infrastructures, housing, healthcare, all of it that actually today's capitalism relies on. I mean, the average age of nurse in Poland is 55. Typical medical professional is a communist-trained professional, not a capitalist one. Most of the housing market we have in Poland is still built in the 70s, in the period of Gierek. It was mostly from loans from the West, but built in that period of time. So it's really centralized. And then we hear the decentralized story, which is about cooperatives, commons, local decision-making, small-scale farming. And like the question is, how do we build meaningful, relationship? And Stafford Beer, who basically was the father of cybernetics, he had this, and I'm gonna leave with this anecdote. I think it's perfect, and bear with me because some crowds don't laugh, but you seem like the kind of people that will. He basically, I tried saying it once at a meeting at a central bank. It didn't work at all. But he basically said, like, imagine that our nervous system, which is both centralized and non-centralized, would be either super centralized or super decentralized. If it was super centralized, talking to you now, I would probably drop dead because I would forget about breathing or beating my heart. So the centralized system would just like drop me dead. But then if it was super decentralized, I would be running off stage now. I wouldn't be running off stage, and I would just pee my pants because the bladder system would just say like, release it now, So we need this meaningful relationship of central and decentralized. I'm gonna leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Turning to Ondřej.
I will try to be short. Maybe I will react. I really liked your many of what you told, and also your depiction of eco-socialist populism, and like to say, okay, you who are rich, you should participate more. But I wondered if the word populism helps, because maybe it's eco-socialism, but with populism there are two troubles. It looks like really great shortcut to power and to what we want to have, but there are two big obstacles, I think. First of all, there are only few cases of populism and quite historically distant forms of populism without strong leader. Populism now means strong leader and political technology which he uses. And another problem was depicted in a really nice way by Polish philosopher Jan Sowa, who told, problem with populism is that is idea of good people and spoiled elite. So it's not emancipatory politics, because populism has to tell people, you are good, you are okay, you don't have to change in anything. And I'm afraid that good left-wing and even more good degrowth politics cannot repeat it. Yeah, we cannot tell the people, you are good, don't change anything. We come to tell them, so much of things have to be changed in your daily lives, in your approach, that we simply cannot be populist, actually, and we have to absolve from this shortcut. But there is one moment in populism which is, I think, very important, because also that problem is that populism is sometimes very aggressive and demagogic against elites. And elites mostly deserve it, but populism attacks them often from very bad reasons, like, for example, from cultural reasons. And to be honest, from this cultural point of view, majority of us who sit here are elites in populist imaginary. And I think we do not deserve this kind of attacks, and like there are other people like Trump, who from cultural point of view is not very elite, who deserves it more because he is fucking privileged bastard. And what I think is really important is to have to try to get closer to perspective to people who are underprivileged, who are not elite, both in economic and in cultural in cultural meaning of the word. And I think this is somehow connected with what Nadia have described. What we really need, not to pretend that we are something different like Babiš or some other populist politicians who pretend that we are ordinary people, we don't read books, and we don't have our elitist interests, and also not to use this political technology which is manufacturing this closeness for Babiš, but really use our own weapons, our sociological knowledge and participant, not observation, but activity, and intellectual experiments to bring closer to this perspective and to have honest dialogue with it. And maybe this can create some alliances and some new political imaginary, which is not populist, but which is popular-oriented.
Okay, so it's a hard question. I want to tell a story instead about the unexpected allies. And so we have a conservative party for 12 years. I think we bet Poland in this competition. And the opposition of Orban's system is also very incompetent. And so let's say Orban's party is far-right or maybe a conservative party, and its opposition is more like a neoliberal coalition. And we don't really have any truly left-wing parties. Not just Orban, but the opposition is also blind to the emerging problems like the housing, care work, etc. And because our joke party, the two-tailed dog party, has reached the 3% at the latest elections. They received funding from the governmental budget, and they created a system where you can apply for fundings to them, and they are the biggest contributors to the solar panel project at the top of our cooperative pub. So yeah, they are our unexpected allies. Thanks.
Okay, we have a bit of time still for questions from you. My idea is to take 3. and then let our guests have the last round of replies to those questions from you. So whatever question you want to ask, raise your hand now. I see the first.
Hi everyone, thank you. Nicolas Giraud from Bratislava. It's more like a comment than a question, but I would be happy to have a reaction to my thoughts. The question we are dealing with today is something I've been thinking about for many years as well, how to implement or integrate degrowth into these our societies from Middle and Eastern Europe. And what I identified as a problem is the fact that there is no left, basically, due to historical reasons. And coming from the West, I'm French, I see that all the degrowth movement come originally from Marxism or anarchism or all these kind of radical left thoughts and ideologies. And today's degrowth comes from this, I'm calling it a fertile ground. The left ideologies are a fertile ground for degrowth. And I'm thinking that we are missing this fertile ground in our countries for degrowth to be implemented. And what I think would be is a problem for degrowth to be popularized in our countries is the fact that a lot of leftist movements in our countries are taking over the hot topics from the West, which are LGBT, ecofeminism, and stuff like that, which for us is like they are our friends, but it really doesn't appeal to the conservative societies in which we are, especially in the villages where these topics are so foreign to their everyday lives that and when they label this with is the left, then it's like making them even more not interested in anything which is also connected to that. So, what if you think if you agree with this analysis, if maybe it would be better to come back to the original leftist struggles, so decent living and more participation in the economy and democracy. And if it's like all these new hot topics from the West are not detrimental for us, making this fertile ground not possible to rise in our societies. This was one point, and the second point, it will be very quick. I also feel like in our countries there is a much bigger Christian ground, much more strong, and I think there is a way to approach those people through the values of Christianity. We have the example of Laudato Si from Pope Francis, which is very close to our topics of degrowth. And if you know about organizations who target those Christian people who can be interested by degrowth from this perspective, Christian perspective.
Thank you. Second question.
Yeah, hello. I would like to ask one short question. Jan, you said that you think one of the main challenges for our region is low trust in the society, which I think it's quite true, and it's important. Like the trust is important for implementing mainly the centralized policies, if they should work and people will not, misuse it or understand it badly. So I would like to ask any one of you, what should we do to increase the trust in our societies? What can be done about it?
Thank you. Third question.
My question is the crisis as an opportunity question. I think like countries in Central and Eastern Europe have a very particular relationship or antagonism towards Russia, and with the invasion of Ukraine, I think like the crisis that that happened because of that made two ruptures in places that are that like play into our cards. The first is that we are experiencing the consequences of the war against Ukraine in the way we are because we are dependent on Russian fossil fuels and Russian gas especially. And so like this is an incentive to speed up the process of decarbonization. I think like this week or last week it was like the Chamber of the Businesses, something like that, that proposed a set of policies for the government, and one of them was to invest more in decarbonization. And like the other rupture is that the cost of living crisis and the increasing price of energy makes undeniable that it's not like something that can be individualized. It's a systemic problem, and it requires strong social policies. These are like the kind of two things that we need. Like we need green economy, preferably degrowth, and we need strong social policies and more socialism. Do you think we can capture this moment and like ride the wave of this, or not?
Thanks. So a question of whether we should not put more focus on traditional leftist cleavages and struggles. I will leave aside the churches because we have a special workshop on them tomorrow with people who actually do participate in churches. So I think that can be a very fertile ground for discussion. A question on trust and a question on how prepared are we to use this crisis as an opportunity. And whomever wants to answer those from our panel can start.
I want to answer to you about Christianity. So I think you need to convince them that Jesus was a socialist because he helped the poor, kicked out the money exchange business from the church. So it's a socialist act. But joking aside, I think even nationalism can help to strengthen certain groups like women in poor countries, and it can be used to build solidarity among these groups, and then higher goals like socialism and such can come.
Can I bundle the questions? Because I think the question on trust, on Christian communities, and the first one on identity politics, I see them as very similar one. So for a very long time, I didn't read Hardt and Negri because, as an economist, I disregarded this as like some social sciences, and we're obviously the true sciences. But at some point, I finally picked them. I read it, and I found the Commonwealth amazing. I think the rest is okay, but like Commonwealth is amazing. And in Commonwealth, basically, they say that the revolution starts with us. What does it mean? That if we are stuck in our identities, whatever they are, we will be unable to form any kind of platform and to change and to find communities with ours, right? So, and it goes all ways. I mean, if people are so closed in their identities and reaffirming them all the time, I don't care if it's queer or being a nationalist. Stop affirming the identity and start finding the communal things. And I have a lot of Christian, even COP members. There are things we talk about after, vodka. Once we kick in, usually it's abortion. My fiancé is an abortion organizer, and So usually in the women's strike, we were targeted also by police surveillance. So it's a hot topic. But we sit at the same table, and once they want to hear our perspective, we try to hear the other perspective, and we try to kind of find some way that makes sense. Okay, I see that. So I think how we change the low trust in the end, and this is what we usually say when we go to small rural villages. We work with local governors. Usually these are cities or rural villages of like 5,000 people, 10,000, 20,000. They are very desperate because their tax base is eroding, because the government is lowering income taxes now in this like, populist craze of like, let's do anything that's gonna get us votes. So they don't have basic money. And we say, okay, gather NGOs at the table. They just fared well with the Ukraine refugee crisis. Everybody likes them. People were donating to them. Gather them at the same table. And very often they would say, oh, we don't trust them because they have different perspectives. They want something from us. And then the other side would say the same. And we always try to explain to them that basically just like trust is not something that you find inside the ground like coal. You give a license, you drill it, you take the profits, and then you ship them out. It stays local. You have to do it local. And it's kind of like dough for bread. You have to keep on working on it. And it works once you start using it. So the more you engage in these difficult relationships, the more trust you get. The more you use these relationships both ways. The more you give, the more you take out. And we do it in the co-op movement. And for the past 2 years, it's been amazing. I mean, we started an IT co-op that is the main, doing all the like IT projects for us. We have a design thinking co-op that's doing all the artist work with us. And at first they would buy something small from us, and then we just started growing an entire ecosystem. And finally, about the moment, I think this is what we're lacking to take really good advantage of this moment. So we're lacking institutions. I mean, like we have some people on the ground. We need institutions. We need think tanks. We need networks. We need cities which we can point to and say, like, maybe it's a small, 10,000 people city, but our degrowth policies worked there. Now we want to scale them to the entire country. If we can do that, then we can take the moment.
Thank you. Nadia or Ondřej?
Okay, I will try to answer those two questions about trust and about crisis as opportunity. It was nice and deeply optimistic to pose the question of trust, because what I see, and maybe it's pessimism, but maybe it's realism, that it's really declining level of trust and actually development which is characteristic for societies before civil wars. In the whole West, what we see is, in fact, dehumanization of opposite sides. So I really liked how Jan described that those practices in Poland, like how you really try to understand to others, because it's really, I think it's really necessary, and it's really, even in context when those others are so unbearable, we need also some level where we will discuss with them and where we will try to understand them. But I think that what really brings some level of trust is common successful struggle. And I don't see it in front of us. Maybe there will be some, and it brings me to answer that question about if we are able to, like, exploit this crisis as a chance. I'm a little bit suspicious to this rhetoric. I think crisis is a chance, but first of all, it's quite cynical to calculate with it too much, because crisis brings human suffering. But above all, I think crises are mostly opportunities in a ways which are not expected and which are not calculable before. Yeah, maybe, for example, communists in the beginning of 30s awaited that crisis is opportunities opportunity for them, and maybe it was much more opportunity for two different people. One was called Roosevelt and one was called Hitler. So yeah, crises are opportunities in a way which cannot be calculated before. And now what we see is, okay, there is deep social unrest, deep social crisis, and in Czech Republic we see completely powerless left and far left. Actually, this should be momentum for it. And we don't see any left-wing platform, any left-wing for demands, and any left-wing mobilization. And what we see is that it's a real opportunity for a group of lunatics who are, I think Josef described them in quite correct way, like combination of Stalinist, Russian far right, people who were radicalized by COVID and who think that everything is conspiracy of pharmaceutical lobby and so on. And they were really able to exploit this opportunity, not us. So, but maybe as crisis can be opportunity in unexpected way, maybe it will be opportunity for some eco-socialist platform or for something like that.
Then that's a nice last word. A characteristic mix of semi-peripheral pessimism and optimism. Už končíme. So this is the end of today's debate. Thanks to our panelists and to you.